I stopped an assassination attempt on the Queen. She repaid me with a private evening. The Grand Palace was filled with lights, music, and the laughter of alien dignitaries from across the galaxy. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, a celebration of the Queen's diplomatic successes, a moment for the leaders of different species to come together and discuss matters of peace. The opulent ballroom gleamed with gold and crystal, the walls decorated with alien art that told stories of history and power. But as always, danger loomed in the background, unnoticed by many. Jack Harper, a human bodyguard, stood in the far corner of the room, watching the crowd carefully. His sharp eyes scanned the faces of the guests, alert for any hint of threat. He wasn't just any guard. He had a reputation for his quick thinking, unshakable focus, and ability to stay calm under pressure. Humans, despite being a relatively young species in the galaxy, had earned their place among the stars not just for their adaptability, but also for their bravery. Jack had proven both traits time and time again in his career. Tonight, however, was different. This wasn't a standard protection job. The Queen of the Alien Empire, Queen Serene, was present, and she had asked for Jack personally. He had worked with her before during delicate diplomatic talks with other factions, and she had grown to trust him. He was more than just a hired gun, he was someone she respected. The Queen was an enigmatic figure, powerful yet graceful, with a mind that could outmaneuver anyone. Jack had often wondered what it would be like to rule such an empire. As the evening wore on, the music grew louder, and the guests seemed to lose themselves in the festivities. Jack remained steady, his posture straight, his expression blank. He had learned long ago not to trust appearances. People didn't act the way they thought. The glimmering smiles, the polite conversations, and the exaggerated gestures, he could see through all of it. There were enemies among the Queen's guests. He just didn't know who yet. Then it happened. A sudden, violent shift in the air, a scream. It was soft at first, almost a whisper, but then it grew louder. Jack's instincts flared. He didn't hesitate. He moved before the sound had even fully registered in his mind. The Queen was in danger. Jack rushed toward the raised platform where Queen Serene was standing, talking to a high-ranking alien diplomat. The crowd began to panic, but Jack's focus remained locked on the Queen. He could see it now. A man in the crowd, hidden among the guests, was pushing through the crowd toward the Queen. The moment the assassin pulled out the concealed weapon, Jack was already there. In a blur of movement, Jack reached the would-be assassin before he could aim his weapon. His hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting it until the weapon dropped to the floor. Jack's other hand found the man's throat, pinning him against the marble pillar. The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. "Stop!" The Queen's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. Jack looked at her, momentarily distracted by her calm command. He glanced down at the trembling assassin in his grip and then back at the Queen. He knew her well enough to understand she was not afraid. She never was. "Take him away," she ordered, her voice sharp and unwavering. Jack nodded and quickly let go of the assassin. He wasn't the one in charge here. As two guards stepped forward to drag the man away, Jack stood beside the Queen. His heart was still racing, but he allowed his face to remain neutral. "That was close," Jack muttered. The Queen smiled slightly, though her eyes were cold. "Too close," she said, her voice steady as she looked at him. "I trust you'll find out who is behind this." Jack nodded once. "I'll get to the bottom of it. You're safe now." The Queen's gaze lingered on him as if weighing something in her mind. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with thought. "You know, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice low, "it's not often that someone like you earns my trust so quickly." Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. He wasn't in the habit of seeking praise, especially not in moments like this. His job was simple: protect the Queen, keep her safe. But there was something in her voice that made him pause. She wasn't just being polite. There was something more behind her words. "I don't take my position lightly," she continued. "But I admit I'm intrigued. You've earned your place in my personal guard. I'll be expecting more from you, Mr. Harper." The Queen's words were not just a formality. Jack could sense the weight of them. She meant what she said. And for the first time, he wondered if this job might lead to more than just protecting a ruler. It might lead to something that could change the course of his life. Before he could say anything further, a new voice broke through the tension. The head of the palace security team, a tall, heavily armored alien with black markings on his face, appeared beside the Queen. He gave a stiff nod to Jack, then turned his attention to the Queen. Your Majesty, we've taken the assassin into custody. He's not talking yet, but we'll get information soon, the security chief said. Good, the Queen replied curtly. Her attention turned back to Jack. I'll expect a full report after you've spoken with him. In the meantime, Mr. Harper, I believe we need to continue this evening. Her tone was calm, composed, but Jack could see a flicker of something in her eyes. A fire hidden beneath the surface. She wasn't just the Queen, she was a leader with a vision, and perhaps more importantly, she was a person who knew when to trust those around her. The guests had begun to resume their positions, though there was still a murmur of unease in the air. The Queen took a deep breath, then offered Jack a nod. Come, we must not let fear dictate the evening. You will join me, won't you? Jack hesitated for a fraction of a second. He could see the genuine invitation in her eyes. She wasn't simply offering him a place beside her out of obligation. She wanted his company. Jack nodded and followed her. As they walked through the ballroom, Jack kept a watchful eye on the guests, all while the Queen seemed perfectly at ease. The world around them was still full of whispers and curious gazes, but for Jack, everything had just shifted. He had been tasked with protecting the Queen, but now it felt as if the stakes were much higher. The night was far from over. The grand palace was no longer filled with laughter and the soft hum of music. The air felt heavy, thick with tension, and the once celebratory atmosphere had turned somber. Jack had expected things to settle down after the attack, but it seemed that the danger was far from over. The Queen had been nearly assassinated. Someone had tried to kill her right in the heart of her empire, and now Jack was part of something much bigger than he had imagined. Jack stood in the palace war room, a large, high-ceilinged chamber with dark wooden walls and shining holographic screens. The Queen's advisors were gathered around a long table, their eyes flickering nervously from one another to the glowing displays. Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the room closely. He had never been one for politics, but the tension in the air was thick. The stakes had been raised, and Jack was now more than just a bodyguard. He was part of the team trying to uncover who was behind the assassination attempt. The Queen sat at the head of the table, calm as always, her hands folded in front of her. She was a woman of great strength and even greater intelligence, and Jack couldn't help but admire the way she carried herself. She wasn't afraid. Her gaze swept across the room, her sharp eyes piercing through every person there, and Jack knew that if anyone knew how to solve this problem, it was her. We must find the source of this betrayal. The Queen's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. She wasn't just talking about the assassination. There was a deeper, darker problem at play. Someone wanted me dead tonight, and I won't let this go unanswered. One of the alien advisors, a tall being with green scales and multiple eyes, spoke up. We have to consider the possibility that this attack is just the beginning. If someone has the resources to make an attempt on your life in such a public manner, they might have more in mind. I agree, another advisor, a sleek humanoid with silvery skin, added. We should strengthen security immediately, lock down the palace, and perhaps even increase patrols around the borders. Jack knew what they were suggesting, hiding behind layers of defense, putting the Queen in a bubble. But he also knew that the Queen wasn't the kind of leader who would tolerate being hidden away. She was too strong, too driven. She wouldn't cower. I don't want to hide, the Queen said firmly, cutting off any further suggestions. We need to expose this plot, not run from it. Jack, she turned to him. What do you think? Jack shifted his weight, feeling the eyes of the room on him. They had all been looking to him since the attack. His actions had been quick, effective, and now they expected more. But the truth was, Jack had been in situations like this before, and he knew how it worked. It wasn't about waiting for things to calm down. It was about finding out who was responsible and doing it fast. We need to dig deeper, Jack said, his voice steady. The assassin tonight was just a puppet. Whoever is pulling the strings wants to destabilize your rule, Your Majesty, but we need to figure out who's behind it and why. The Queen nodded thoughtfully. I agree, and I trust you to lead the investigation. You've already proven your worth to me, Jack. Jack wasn't one for praise, but the Queen's words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't just grateful for his actions earlier, she was placing her trust in him. And in that moment, he knew that the path ahead of him was no longer just about protecting her. It was about being part of something much larger than himself. With that, the meeting broke up, and Jack was left with the Queen's personal security team, a few of her most trusted guards. They were still analyzing the assassin's belongings, trying to find any clues that might point to the mastermind behind the plot. But Jack knew the real work would come from looking into the Queen's inner circle. As he walked through the quiet palace corridors, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse. The palace had been compromised, and whoever was behind this assassination attempt was far more skilled than any enemy Jack had ever faced. He had to be careful. One wrong move, and the Queen's life could be in even greater danger. The next few hours were a blur of interviews, analysis, and searching through the Queen's records. Jack worked closely with her security team, but he also found himself spending more time alone with the Queen, as she wanted to know everything that was happening. She was not the kind of leader to remain distant during times like these. She was hands-on, focused, and determined to find out who had betrayed her. As the night wore on, Jack and the Queen stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The stars were clear in the sky, and the distant hum of the city below felt strangely peaceful compared to the storm inside the palace. "You've done more for me tonight than I ever expected, Jack," the Queen said quietly, her voice soft but sincere. "Not many would risk their lives for someone they barely know, especially when there's so much at stake. But you did." Jack turned to look at her. There was no mistaking the genuine appreciation in her voice. It was rare for someone like her to show vulnerability, but in that moment she did. And Jack couldn't help but feel something shift between them. There was a connection, something unspoken, that neither of them had expected. "I don't do this for the thanks, Your Majesty," Jack replied, his voice low. "I'm just doing my job, you don't owe me anything." But the Queen wasn't satisfied with that answer. She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "But I do owe you something. You've earned my trust tonight, Jack, and for that I'll make sure you are rewarded." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Rewarded?" The Queen smiled slightly. "A private evening with me, just the two of us. I think you've earned that, don't you?" Jack wasn't sure how to respond to that. The Queen wasn't offering him anything like what he was used to: gold, wealth, power. She was offering her company, her time. And in that moment he realized that her offer wasn't just a gesture of gratitude, it was something deeper. She wanted him to be a part of her world, to understand her better. "I'd be honored," Jack finally said, his tone neutral, though inside he felt a small flicker of something he hadn't felt before, something like curiosity, maybe even anticipation. The Queen nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she turned back to the city below. "We'll talk more later. For now, get some rest. Tomorrow will be just as important as today." Jack nodded and turned to leave, but he couldn't help but glance back. The Queen stood there alone for a moment longer, her back straight and her eyes focused on the distant horizon. He had always admired her strength, but in that moment he also saw the weight of the responsibilities she carried. Tomorrow, he knew, would be just the beginning. The palace was quiet when Jack woke up the next morning, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than it should. The peaceful stillness contrasted with the chaos of the previous evening. His mind was still sharp from the night's events, but there was something more pressing now. The Queen had trusted him with more than just her safety. She had given him a role in uncovering the conspiracy that threatened her reign. Jack stood in front of a large window, looking out over the sprawling grounds of the palace. It was still early, the sun not fully risen, casting the world in a pale blue light. There was a sense of peace outside, but Jack knew that underneath, danger was waiting. The assassin was only the beginning. Someone wanted the Queen dead, and that someone wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. He could hear footsteps behind him, and he didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The Queen had come to find him, just like she said she would. "You're up early," she said softly as she entered the room. Jack could tell she hadn't slept much either. Her face was a little more tired than usual, but her composure remained intact. She was strong, but Jack could see the strain in her eyes. The weight of leadership was heavy, especially when you had enemies both outside and within your own ranks. "I couldn't sleep," Jack said. "There's too much on my mind." "We need to find out who's behind this, Your Majesty." The Queen nodded, her expression serious. "I know, and I need your help to do it. I've already had my advisors looking into the attack, but I trust you more than anyone else." Jack wasn't sure how to respond. He hadn't expected to be trusted so completely by someone like her. But in that moment, he realized that the Queen wasn't just relying on him for protection. She was trusting him to help secure her empire. She saw him as more than just a bodyguard. She saw him as an ally. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jack said, his voice steady. But we need to work fast. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that the people behind this will strike again. The Queen's gaze was intense, and for a moment their eyes locked. She didn't look away. Then let's get to work. The next few hours were filled with strategy and tension. Jack worked closely with the Queen's security team, following leads and tracking down any information that could point to the mastermind behind the plot. The more they dug, the more complicated the situation became. Every step forward revealed more questions than answers. The Queen remained at the heart of the investigation, her mind working at full speed. She was a natural leader, her ability to see the bigger picture unmatched by anyone else in the room. Jack could see that, despite the pressure, she wasn't backing down. She wasn't afraid. They combed through the records of the palace's visitors, searching for any signs of unusual activity. They reviewed the footage from the banquet, looking for anyone who might have been acting suspiciously, but everything seemed to lead to dead ends. It was as if the people behind the attack had been prepared for everything. Jack felt a growing frustration. This wasn't like any mission he'd ever been on before. Usually he could see the signs, an enemy's weak point, a slip-up, a mistake that gave them away. But this felt different. The attackers were good, and whoever they were, they had planned this meticulously. "Your Majesty," Jack said after a long silence, "we're missing something. We've gone through all the obvious leads, but we haven't looked deeper. We need to go beyond the palace records. Someone close to you is involved, and they've covered their tracks well. We need to find out who." The Queen looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing, but who would betray me? I trust my people, Jack." Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The Queen was right to trust her inner circle, but that was also what made her vulnerable. People who were close to her had the most access, and they could use that trust to destroy her. He had seen it happen before. Loyalty wasn't always what it seemed. "There's only one way to find out," Jack said. "We need to confront those closest to you, Your Majesty. We need to speak to the people who have the most to gain from your downfall." The Queen hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if she were considering the weight of his words. "You think there are traitors among my advisors?" "I don't know yet," Jack replied. "But we won't find out unless we start asking the right questions." The Queen stood up, her posture straight and regal. "Then let's start. I'll arrange for you to meet with my inner circle. You can ask them whatever you need to. But I warn you, Jack, these people have been loyal to me for years. If you accuse them of treason, it won't go over well." Jack met her gaze and nodded. "I understand, but we can't afford to hold back. We need answers." Later that day, Jack found himself sitting in a small, dimly lit room within the palace, facing three of the Queen's most trusted advisors. The air was tense, and Jack could feel the weight of their eyes on him. He had done this before, interrogating suspects, looking for signs of guilt. But something about this situation was different. These weren't just ordinary criminals. They were people who had been at the Queen's side for years, people who had helped her build her empire. Jack didn't want to believe that any of them could be responsible for the plot against her, but he knew better than to trust appearances. The first advisor, a tall, broad-shouldered alien with dark green skin, was the Queen's military commander. He had always been fiercely loyal to her, his devotion unmatched. But there was something in his eyes now that Jack couldn't place, something cold, almost guarded. The second advisor, a sharp-eyed woman with pale skin and long, silver hair, was the Queen's chief strategist. She had a reputation for being calm and calculating, always thinking 10 steps ahead. Jack had worked with her before and found her to be intelligent and reliable. But now, he wasn't so sure. Her eyes darted nervously as Jack asked his questions. The third advisor, a middle-aged alien with a deep, gravelly voice, was the Queen's financial advisor. He had always been discreet and secretive, but he had never given Jack any reason to doubt him. Still, there was something in his expression now, a flicker of discomfort when Jack asked him about the night of the assassination. Jack wasn't looking for overt signs of guilt. He wasn't going to catch them in a lie right away. But what he was looking for was hesitation, the way their bodies shifted when they spoke, the way they avoided certain topics. A guilty person might not show it immediately, but Jack had learned to spot the smallest signs of unease. "So tell me," Jack said, leaning forward, his voice steady, "where were all of you when the assassination attempt took place? Did anyone see anything unusual?" The commander shifted in his seat, his hands resting on the table. "I was overseeing security." Everything seemed normal until the attack happened. We were caught off guard, but I acted quickly to secure the area. The strategist spoke next, her voice calm, but Jack noticed her fingers tapping nervously on the table. I was in the banquet hall discussing future military operations with the Queen. Nothing seemed out of place until the chaos erupted. Finally, the financial advisor spoke, his voice low and controlled. I was in my office reviewing financial reports. I didn't hear about the attack until it was over. Jack listened carefully, his mind racing. Something wasn't adding up. The answers were too rehearsed, too perfect. These three people had been close to the Queen for years, and yet none of them had anything specific to say about the night of the attack. He leaned back in his chair and glanced at the Queen, who was standing silently in the corner of the room, watching the conversation unfold. Her face was unreadable, but Jack could see the worry in her eyes. She was trusting him to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. After a long moment, Jack spoke again. I think we're missing something. Someone here knows more than they're letting on. The room fell silent, and Jack could feel the tension rise. The Queen's advisors exchanged looks, but none of them spoke. The Queen stepped forward, her voice steady and calm. If there are traitors among us, we will find them, but I will not stand for false accusations. Jack nodded. We'll get to the bottom of this, Your Majesty. The investigation had grown colder than Jack had expected. He had spent days trying to unravel the threads of the plot against the Queen, but each lead seemed to fade into nothing. The three advisors had given him nothing more than what they had already told him during their first meeting. Each of their stories had been solid, but the more Jack thought about it, the more he realized that their perfect answers weren't exactly reassuring. He had expected some sign, a slip-up, but instead he was met with calm, controlled responses. Still, Jack knew he couldn't afford to jump to conclusions. Whoever was behind this was careful, too careful. Every time he thought he had a breakthrough, something slipped through his fingers. The people around the Queen were loyal, yes, but loyalty didn't always mean trustworthiness. He couldn't help but wonder if someone was playing a much deeper game, something he couldn't see yet. One afternoon, as Jack walked through the quiet palace hallways, his thoughts consumed by the investigation, he was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He turned and saw the Queen approaching, her expression as calm as ever, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. He had gotten used to the strength in her gaze, but today he saw something else, a hint of vulnerability. You wanted to speak with me, Your Majesty? Jack asked as she came to a stop beside him. She nodded slightly, her eyes scanning the corridor before she spoke. I've been thinking, Jack, about the investigation. We're not making enough progress. The longer this goes on, the more I fear that we might be overlooking something. Jack remained silent for a moment, watching her closely. The weight of the situation was heavy on both of them, but the Queen was determined, her mind always focused on the future. He had come to admire her resolve. I agree, Jack finally said. We're missing something big. I've spoken to your advisors and I've gone through the records, but it's like we're hitting dead ends at every turn. Whoever did this is smart. They've covered their tracks well. The Queen glanced at him, her voice soft but firm. I'm not blind to the possibility that someone close to me is involved, Jack, but I need to know who and why. Jack's mind raced. She was right. This wasn't just about finding a traitor. It was about understanding why someone wanted her dead. Whoever had ordered the assassination had a reason, a plan. The pieces didn't fit, and Jack felt like he was on the edge of something he couldn't quite reach. I'm not going to let this go, Your Majesty, Jack said, his voice steady. I'll keep digging. But I'll need more access to your inner circle. If we're going to find out who's behind this, we need to see who has the most to gain. The Queen nodded, her expression serious. You'll have what you need, but be careful, Jack. I don't want this to tear apart everything we've built. Jack understood. He couldn't risk losing her trust, not when the stakes were so high. The Queen's empire was fragile right now. Any sign of weakness, any hint of betrayal could tip the balance. He had to tread carefully. The next day, Jack found himself once again in the presence of the Queen's advisors. This time, however, things felt different. The tension in the room was palpable. He had made it clear that he wasn't just following the Queen's orders anymore. He was running the investigation. And it was clear from the way the advisors reacted that they knew it. As he entered the meeting room, Jack's eyes immediately went to the three advisors who had already been questioned. The Queen's military commander, the strategist, and the financial advisor. All three had a different look in their eyes today. They seemed more on edge, their movements stiffer, as if they knew this was coming. "Jack," the Queen greeted him, her voice calm but her eyes betraying a hint of uncertainty. "We've gathered the necessary people. Please proceed with your questions." Jack nodded, turning his attention to the advisors. "We need to go over everything again. I need details. Your alibis during the night of the assassination, your actions, your movements, your conversations." The military commander spoke first, his voice as deep and unwavering as ever. "I already told you I was overseeing security. The situation unfolded quickly and we had no warning. There's nothing more to add." Jack didn't respond right away, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the words. There was something about the commander's tone, something that didn't sit right. He wasn't angry, but he was too calm, too controlled. The strategist was next, her sharp gaze fixed on Jack as she spoke. "I was in a meeting with the Queen discussing strategies for upcoming negotiations. I already told you all of this." Jack felt her eyes on him as she spoke, and he could see the faintest twitch in her fingers as she crossed her arms. She wasn't as composed as she wanted to appear. The way she kept looking to the side, avoiding direct eye contact, Jack caught it. She was hiding something. The financial advisor spoke last, his voice measured. "I've already been questioned, Jack. I've told you where I was. I don't understand why we're going over this again." Jack held up his hand, signaling for quiet. He had been hoping for something, anything, that would give him a hint, but these three were too skilled. They were hiding something, but they weren't slipping up. Not yet. Jack stood up, pacing slowly in front of them. He needed to get to the core of this. Whoever was behind the attack had planned it too carefully. It wasn't just about removing the Queen, it was about what would happen afterward. The assassination attempt was the first move in a much bigger game. The Queen's voice cut through his thoughts. "Jack," she said, her tone firm but calm, "what are you thinking?" He turned to her, his eyes focused. "I'm thinking we need to stop looking at this like a straightforward attack. Whoever did this didn't just want to kill you, they wanted to create chaos. This is bigger than we thought." The Queen looked at him, a spark of realization flickering in her eyes. "So you think they're trying to destabilize the entire empire?" "Exactly," Jack said. "If we're going to stop this, we need to find out who's trying to use this assassination attempt as a way to tear the empire apart. Someone has a plan, and it's bigger than just taking you down." The room fell silent. The Queen's advisors exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke. It was as if they knew something was coming, something that would change everything. "I'll need full access to the palace's intelligence files," Jack continued. "We need to dig deeper, find out who stands to benefit from your downfall." The Queen's gaze hardened as she considered his words. "You'll have full access, but be careful, Jack. We can't afford to alienate the wrong people. If we push too hard, we could make more enemies than we already have." Jack nodded. "I understand, but we don't have time to be careful anymore." That night, Jack found himself alone in the palace's intelligence room, surrounded by holographic displays and encrypted files. The Queen had granted him full access to everything, and now it was time to sift through the mountains of data. He wasn't sure where to start, but his instincts told him that there was something in the financial records, something that had been hidden from view. Hours passed as Jack scrolled through encrypted messages, confidential documents, and trade agreements. It was grueling work, but he knew he had to keep pushing. The answers were here, he just needed to find them. Then, as the night wore on, he found something. A series of encrypted messages, hidden deep in the system. The messages were older than the assassination attempt, but they were too carefully written to be ignored. There were mentions of a group, a faction that was working behind the scenes to weaken the Queen's hold on power. The messages spoke of alliances, secret meetings, and financial deals that were never meant to see the light of day. Jack leaned closer to the holographic display, his heart racing. He was onto something, but he wasn't sure how much time he had left. Whoever was behind this plot had been covering their tracks, and they were getting closer to their goal. He had to act fast. The morning light streamed through the palace windows, casting a soft glow over the vast courtyard. But inside the intelligence room, Jack was focused on a different world, one of hidden alliances, coded messages, and a conspiracy that had been buried deep within the palace's walls. The pieces were finally starting to come together. He had uncovered enough to know that the assassination attempt was only the first part of a larger plan. But now, he had to make sense of it all before it was too late. The encrypted messages he had found were troubling. They mentioned a group, one that had been operating in the shadows for years. Jack wasn't sure who they were or what their ultimate goal was, but the messages made one thing clear. This group wanted to take down the Queen. And not just by killing her, they were after the entire foundation of her empire. Jack's eyes scanned the information on the screen. The names and places were mostly unknown to him, but there were a few familiar references. One in particular stood out, a name he recognized from the Queen's court, a trusted advisor, a man who had always seemed to have the Queen's best interests at heart. But now Jack knew better. He had to be involved. The pieces fit too perfectly. The door to the intelligence room opened, and Jack turned to see the Queen standing in the doorway. She looked tired, her expression more serious than ever, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes as she looked at him. "You've been at this for hours," she said softly. "Have you found anything?" Jack stood up, his fingers brushing over the screen as he turned to face her. "Yes, Your Majesty, I've found the key to this entire conspiracy. The attack was just the beginning. Someone close to you is pulling the strings, someone you trust." The Queen's gaze hardened. "Who?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded toward the screen. "It's General Tarek, your military commander. He's the one behind this. He's been working with a group of rogue advisors and traitors, trying to destabilize your empire for months." The Queen's face went pale, and for a moment she looked as though she had been struck. She had trusted Tarek with her life, had known him for years, counted him as one of her closest allies. To hear that he was involved in a plot to bring her down was more than a betrayal. It was a knife to the heart. "I don't believe it," the Queen whispered, her voice almost trembling. "Tarek, he's been with me from the start. He helped me build this empire." "I know," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "That's what makes this so dangerous. He's been working behind the scenes, using his position to manipulate events. The assassination attempt was just the first phase. He's planning to move against you now while you're still vulnerable." The Queen took a step back, her mind clearly racing. She had always known that there would be enemies, that there would be threats to her rule, but she had never imagined it would come from someone so close, someone she had relied on. "I won't let him take my empire," she said, her voice firm once more, the regal strength returning to her presence. "We have to stop him before he moves against me." Jack nodded. "We will, Your Majesty, but we need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the more time he has to put his plan into motion." The tension in the palace grew palpable as Jack and the Queen prepared for the final confrontation. They had gathered the most trusted members of her inner circle, those who had not yet been implicated in the conspiracy. The time for subtlety was over. They needed to strike before Tarek could move again. The Queen stood tall, surrounded by her most loyal advisors, including Jack. She had always been composed, always in control, but today was different. Today, she was a woman on the edge, ready to take back her empire. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. "Tarek has gone too far," the Queen said, her voice cold with resolve. "We'll expose him and we'll make sure he can never harm the empire again. Jack, I need you to be there when we confront him." Jack nodded. "I'll be ready, Your Majesty, but we need to make sure we have everything in place. We can't let him slip away." The plan was set. Jack would lead the operation, but the Queen would be at its center. The confrontation had to happen in the heart of the palace, where Tarek's influence was strongest. They would confront him publicly, forcing him to face the consequences of his betrayal. But even as they prepared, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be as simple as confronting a traitor. Tarek was powerful. He had an army behind him, and his reach within the palace was vast. That evening, the Queen stood in the throne room, the center of her empire. The great hall was silent, the flickering candles casting long shadows across the stone floor. Jack was positioned by her side, ready for whatever might come. The doors opened, and General Tarek entered, flanked by his loyal soldiers. He was calm, his expression unreadable, but Jack could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew something was about to happen. "Your Majesty," Tarek said, his voice smooth and respectful as if nothing had changed. "I trust you are well." The Queen didn't smile. Her gaze was unwavering as she looked at him. "I was well," she said coldly, "until I discovered the truth." Tarek's eyes flickered just for a moment, but it was enough. Jack could see the change in him, a brief, almost imperceptible shift that betrayed his calm demeanor. "I don't know what you mean," Tarek replied, his voice still steady, but there was a hint of unease now. He was trying to mask it, but Jack knew better. "You've been working against me," the Queen said, her voice sharp. "For months, you've been plotting with a group of traitors and advisors to undermine my reign. You've been planning my assassination, using your position to manipulate the very people who should be loyal to me." Tarek's eyes widened for a moment, then he regained his composure. "This is madness," he said, stepping forward. "You've been deceived, Your Majesty. There are people who wish to see you fall, but I am not one of them. I have always been loyal to you." "Loyalty doesn't come with knives behind your back," the Queen replied, her voice cold and final. "You tried to kill me, and now you'll pay for it." Before Tarek could respond, the guards moved in, quickly apprehending him. He struggled, but the Queen's soldiers were swift. Tarek's soldiers, those who had been loyal to him, hesitated, caught between their loyalty to the Queen and their allegiance to their commander. But Jack stepped forward, his voice low and commanding. "Don't let him fool you," Jack said. "He's been planning this from the start. You know it. You all know it." The tension in the room was thick. Tarek's soldiers glanced at each other, uncertainty clouding their eyes. One by one, they began to lower their weapons, their loyalty to the Queen winning out over their fear of Tarek. The general was finally subdued, his hands bound as he was forced to kneel before the Queen. The room was silent, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. The Queen stood over him, her gaze unflinching. "You betrayed me," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 100 decisions. "And now you will face the consequences." The Queen's soldiers moved in to take Tarek away, but before they could leave, Tarek spoke again, his voice dripping with venom. "You think this is over," he sneered. "You think you've won? There are more of us, more who want to see you fall. You'll never be safe." "No matter what you do, I'll never stop." The Queen's eyes never left him. "Then you'll be the first to know how it feels to fail." The palace settled into a quiet stillness after Tarek's arrest. The Queen had taken back control of her empire, but Jack knew that this was only the beginning. There were still forces in the shadows, still enemies who would try to tear her down. But the Queen had proven herself. She was stronger than her enemies had ever imagined. And Jack had proven himself too. He had started as just a bodyguard, but now he was someone she could trust, someone who had helped her protect the empire. They had both changed, but the bond between them was now unbreakable. As the Queen stood alone, looking out over the palace from the balcony, Jack joined her, standing by her side. She glanced at him, a small, appreciative smile on her face. "You did well, Jack," she said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Jack nodded. "We did it together, Your Majesty. This is your victory." She smiled again, this time with a warmth that softened her regal demeanor. "Perhaps, but you've earned your place here by my side." And in that moment, Jack realized that his role in her life had changed forever. He wasn't just a bodyguard anymore. He was part of something much bigger than himself, part of a future that only the Queen and he could.